Hello, I'm Mike Sexton. I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina, and I appreciate being asked to participate in this project. My story regarding sexual abuse and sexual assault was when I was 8. I was a product of incest. I grew up in a family of 11 kids, and it wasn't anything vindictive. It was just clearly sex wasn't talked about in the household, and my older brothers and sisters were trying to figure it out and trying to understand what was going on with their bodies, and me being one of the younger ones was an easy target. What was more traumatic for me was when I was 8 going on 9 years old, one of my sisters 3 years older was raped by a guy that my dad had brought into the house. He was a handyman that worked at the church, and we needed some things done around the house, so he offered to help. My dad brought him out, and he decided to take some liberties with my sister Sally. And when she told my parents about it, it became her fault. They told her that she was too promiscuous. Instead of taking this guy out back and holding him accountable, which is why I'm in the work I'm doing now. It's because we don't hold people accountable for their actions. And this is a horrific issue and just a violation of human rights that mostly men take liberty to do and feel like it's okay. And it's not. And we need to figure out how to step up and tell them that they're wrong and they need to be accountable for their actions. Yeah.
So as a brother of someone that has been sexually assaulted, how did it affect you, and how did it affect the family and the relationship and the dynamic there?
Well, with the fact that I was a victim of the incestual sexual abuse that took place, I struggled in relationships. I didn't really get sexually active until I was out of high school, just because I was a small kid and didn't have a whole lot of confidence about how to approach girls, let alone talk about a sexual relationship. But as I got older, 19, 20, 21, I got pretty active to the point where I was womanizing all over the place, one-night stands, and it was easy in that I could fulfill myself and not emotionally get attached.
You seem to have no respect for women at that time.
Exactly.
And no respect for yourself.
Yeah, it was very much, that was the case. And I functioned that way till mid-30s. And the light for me was just getting to a point of surrender and turning my life over to Christ that brought a whole new perspective on what that was about.
It's hard to love someone else when you don't love yourself.
Yeah.
And people go into relationships and they think they can fix something or make it better, but you can't love enough for two, and you can't make it work by yourself. So, so whenever your sister and you, how did y'all cope with your parents not standing up for you and not protecting you?
Well, it's not something that I've even spoken to this day with my sister about. I don't know, what her take is on that, because I've never asked her. I just know, to me, it was appalling.
Yeah.
At 8 years old, I didn't know that it was appalling because, you just don't think in those terms. But as I've gotten older and looking back and doing the work that I'm doing now for the last 10, 11 years, and advocating for women, is that it clearly was uncalled for that this guy was not called out and held accountable for what he did. And it's no telling how many others that he had taken that liberty with as well.
Exactly.
Just thinking it was okay because he was never called out on it.
Well, a lot of times when victims of sexual assault, they tell someone in authority, like a parent, and they expect the parents to do something, they almost feel abandoned and rejected again, and like I said, made to feel like it's their fault.
Yeah.
They wonder what they did, if it was something they wore or something they said, and all of that is not the case. The case is it was just a perpetrator, and if they find a way, they're going to.
Yeah.
So if you had something to say to the child, the inner child of you that was sexually assaulted whenever you were young, what would you say to him?
I've had this conversation Because I'm a firm believer that forgiveness is the key. And so I've forgiven the abuser in my particular case of incest, and myself in my role in that, because clearly it was not my fault.
That's
And I
right.
understand that it was not my fault. It was a case of an abuser trying to figure out themselves and not having a clue what they were dealing with, and just trying to get and understand what was going on with their own body. So it really was not their fault either. If anything, the fault falls in that it wasn't addressed as it should have been by my parents, who should have had that conversation and addressed it in a healthy manner instead of putting 11 kids in harm's way by not.
Have you had that conversation with your parents, or has your sister?
Both my parents are gone,
Yeah.
but I've forgiven them as well. I had some conversations with them before they passed, but didn't get into too much depth on it because of the sense that clearly they felt some shame and guilt around it. And for me, at that point, it just wasn't worth going down that road and putting their nose in it.
And you have to also consider the era they brought up in, that it just didn't talk about it. Even though it was prevalent, it just didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
Because child sexual assault is a multi-generational epidemic.
Absolutely, and that was part of the conversation I had with my mother, was that she may not have been abused herself, but she had a sister that was a lot of evidence around that. She had an uncle and a great uncle that both were products of sexual assault. My dad was raped when he was a Boy Scout at summer camp. And so on both sides of the family, it would have been a generational thing. And that's part of, for me, in my spiritual walk, of getting to a place of understanding that the generational bondage can be freed by simply surrendering and giving it to God. And letting Him fight that fight.
Exactly. And a lot of this, the perpetrator holds you into silence and fear and shame, and by silence. And through that silence, he's able to continue hurting you or hurting other children. So what can you tell me that you are doing in your community to help other child sexual assault survivors?
Well, the primary work that I do is around domestic violence and the abusive relationships, as far as the power and control that comes into play with those relationships. Sexual assault and abuse is clearly a tactic that's used in those. But a lot of what I do is empowering survivors to help them tell their story and get to a place of understanding that they have an amazing call in their life, and helping them get to that place of forgiveness, not necessarily for the abuser, but for their own role in it, because it's clearly not their fault.
And to say that you are loved and you deserve to be loved. And God has always been with you, walking in the pit with you, even though things have not stopped, like you had planned or had hoped.
Yeah.
But that He's never left your side.
Yeah, exactly.
And a lot of times you live and you've lived through the circumstances because He's been there for you.
Yeah, it's really hard to understand that whole concept of finding joy in the trials when you're going through the fire. But clearly God will use everything for good. And the fact that a victim has gone through what they've gone through, they will be able to relate to someone going through it much better than anyone that's never gone through it.
Exactly.
Because they can talk the talk and walk that walk and go emotionally with them where someone that's not been there cannot.
And that's the reason, like if a survivor goes to counseling, they don't need to stop at one if it doesn't fit their personality or their experiences, because some just have book sense and some cannot relate. But there are so many different healing modalities and different counseling techniques that do work. And that's the reason it's important to continue to search and not give up, because you're healing and you're thriving over surviving.
Right.
It's what makes the human spirit amazing.
Yeah, it's key that I think that people get to a place of understanding that they trust their instinct. If they are having a conversation with someone, counseling or otherwise, that it just feels off, then move on. Because you know yourself better than anybody.
Exactly.
You know your situation better than anyone. That there may be some people that you run into out there and talking about this that may want to project some things upon you, but you know yourself better than anybody.
Would you say with the indifference of our society that we really have a sick society that is not really looking at, it's like just they're looking through acceptance of this is the way it is instead of trying to change things. They've been indifferent for so long, it's just become commonplace.
Well, it's the tactic of the enemy. Satan has done that his entire existence, is taking a little bit of truth and just perverting it to the point where you get this huge division. And so people wind up down a road that was not what God intended at all. Any form of addiction, that's been the case. Alcohol. I mean, clearly Jesus made wine at a wedding, because it's about celebrating. But the enemy takes that and makes an obsession for people, and then people wind up enslaved to alcohol through alcoholism. Or the entire family is enslaved to it because somebody in the family has been held hostage by alcohol. And that's exactly what the enemy wants. So we need to have that lens on, that we're in a spiritual warfare at all times, which again comes back to the relational piece, is that we're here to help each other out and fight this fight together. Nobody has to go into the trenches alone. We put on the armor together, we go out and fight the fight together.
Would you say your faith is what has helped you heal the most?
Absolutely. Yeah, but there's no telling if I'd be alive, let alone where I'd be right now if I didn't have Christ. Totally different creation.
Well, if you had one final thought that you would like to share with our viewers, what would that be?
Ask for help. You don't have to do this alone. Be willing to get yourself in that position of vulnerability that there is help available and people want to help. There's a lot of people out there that want to and they just don't know how to. So be willing to share your story with someone, as scary as it might be. And understand that there's other people who are going through what you're going through, that you're not alone in it. And the enemy will do that all day long. They'll try to get you off in the corner and beat you up and tell you that nobody cares, that you're a piece of garbage. And that's the furthest thing from the truth.
Do you have a number or a website they can go to?
For our domestic violence services, there's a local hotline, which is the Shelter for Battered Women. It's 704-332-2513. The Women's Commission itself is designed to help victims, children. We work with abusers as well. That number is 704-336-3210.
You have a website?
The website is http://CSS, as in Community Support Services, .charmeck, CHARMECK.org.
Well, thank you for your time and thank you for your story. God bless.